Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. We're looking forward to sharing this information with you. I'm not the most technical person on earth, so Mario Castillo is here with us to kind of help, especially with the chat when I share my screen and the videos. Yes, this is being recorded, and we'll be able to email you the recording later today. And all of these slides we'll make available with the links to the websites, because this is a very interactive webinar that we're having. But the key is that you have access to this information and access to be able to go on your own to these websites. So we're happy to share all this information with you. And I'm always available if you need to email me or call me, text me later. Believe me, realtors across the city ask me questions about this topic almost every day. So happy to share this information as much as possible. So we're just going to go ahead and begin here immediately. Let's just start right quick with this. Okay, Mario, I'm assuming people can see. Welcome to Real Estate After Harvey. And I think this is a great opportunity and a great time for us to talk about what has really happened since Harvey. Where are we as a city and a county? What is the impact? What's going on as it impacts real estate? Not only today, but certainly in the future. And a lot of what we're going to talk about is the constant evolution of these changes and what impact it's going to have on housing, housing cost, housing development, housing trends. And we're going to try and share all this information with you as much as we can. It's important to remember that when we start talking about rules and regulations, each governmental entity really has its own set of rules and regulations. And I don't want to be accused of only talking about the city of Houston, but I put here on the map, the city of Houston is the yellow area, and you see the ETJ area outside of the city in the gray. But the county certainly has its own set of rules that are different from the city of Houston. And of course, West University Place and Bel Air and some of these others have their own set of rules also. But for the majority of us, especially if you sell inside, the Grand Parkway, it's really the city of Houston rules. But I will try to differentiate between the city and the county. I'm not going to differentiate every little other Westview or Bel Air. In many instances, those cities, the smaller cities, especially the more affluent ones, their rules and regulations are even stricter than those in Houston. And of course, their expenditure on drainage and infrastructure has been easier because they have a smaller footprint compared to the city and the county there. So I want to continue to differentiate between the city and the county. Where we're at, and these are kind of some overviews, and then we're going to delve into it. Harvey hits in August of 2017, and you get a tremendous situation going on. You had 30,000 structures that flooded in the 100-year floodplain. You had 28,000 that flood in the 500-year floodplain. That's about 60,000 structures. But what continues to be important is the continuing large number of structures that flood outside of the floodplain. And so the overwhelming response, 90,000 structures flooded, were not in the 100-year floodplain and were not in the 500-year floodplain. And when you take out the release from the reservoir and you take out flooding as an impact from Lake Houston and Kingwood and those areas up there that were impacted maybe by the lakes, the statistics are virtually the same. You still had 24,000 in the 100-year, 22,000 in the 500, or 46,000 structures, but 65,000 structures flooded outside of the floodplain. And we have seen this for decades. More and more and more homes flooding that are not remotely close to the bayou, not remotely close to the 100-year floodplain. We have this perception that we have a problem of flooding in Houston from water rising from the bayou. And we need to get off of that perception altogether. We flood on a very regular basis in the city. You just aren't well aware of it because the city is so large. And if it floods on Navigation Avenue and you live in Kirkwood, you never know about it, and for the most part, you really don't care. If Kingwood Boulevard floods all the time and you live in Meyerland, you don't drive on Kingwood Boulevard, so you really didn't know. The thing about Harvey was that there was equitable distribution of pain. It flooded in every district council member's district, and it flooded in enough areas that you had the political will to finally do something about it. Like I say, if only Meyerland floods, you would never have had some of these changes because people in North and West Houston wouldn't have been willing to pay for many of the changes. But a lot of the flooding throughout the region is from rainfall in a totally different area. I can flood in the Heights if it rains 5 miles to the northwest of here and the water is trying to get to the Gulf of Mexico and has nowhere to go, and it can cause flooding in Oak Forest, Timber Grove, Shady Acres, and the Heights on its way to get there. It wouldn't necessarily be water rising from White Oak Bayou and going back the other direction. It's water getting from one place to another. And the reality of it is we're getting more rainfall than ever in a shorter period of time, and the water has nowhere to go. And that's just a typical street grid anywhere in the city. Forget where the 100-year floodplain is. You pour 6 inches of rain in 1 hour, the water cannot get into the storm sewer system quick enough, and it has nowhere to go but rise through that street, which is designed to hold water. I want to be clear, the streets are designed to hold water so that they're not in your house, but the water backs up over the street and into structures on a very regular basis. And we have to just be concerned about how this works. So we have Harvey, and we had certain changes that happened after Harvey. Because of Harvey, you immediately got what was changes to Chapter 19 of the floodplain ordinance in the city of Houston. So they adopted new regulatory changes and basically regulated more than ever in the 100 and the 500-year floodplain, just in that geographic area. Those were the most immediate and the most severe changes that we've seen to date. The county went ahead and adopted, per policy, what is the 500-year floodplain became the 100-year floodplain for the city, for the county purposes, and the 100-year floodplain became a 25-year floodplain. So they automatically consider the 500-year floodplain on the map today to be the 100-year floodplain. Now, all of these rules are going to change when you get a new map based on new information. So these are stopgap measures put in place in 2018, designed to last until about 2022 or 2023. And then you're going to get a new set of rules and regulations. So you have moving parts. And it's important to understand you've got city regulation, you've got national flood maps, you've got national flood insurance program, you've got the state, you've got the Army Corps of Engineers. I mean, I have a graph and a chart that kind of tells me who's doing what. And it's like spokes on a wheel. I mean, every time one group does one thing, it impacts the other group. But it's just kind of important to understand who's doing what. So we have these changes to the building codes. And of course, then we had the passage of the Harris County flood control bond, which is about $2.5 billion, leveraged with about another $2.5 billion, of projects that we had known for a very long period of time that needed to be done. This was low-hanging fruit that had been identified years in advance in order to expedite these programs. But really, we had, at that time in 2018, we knew of about $30 billion worth of projects that we really needed. But this is the start. This is not the solution. Everyone needs to understand we're on a long journey of solving flooding problems in Houston and Harris County, and we're just beginning. And as long as there's transparency and accountability and we do the projects, they will have to come back to the public and they will have to ask for more money. We were just lucky to have this money leveraged by a lot of federal money at the moment after a hurricane event like Harvey. So this is the beginning of projects, but it's certainly not going to solve the problem. I mentioned in my class that we teach, we got about 10 holes in our boat, and if we fill 4 of the holes, you still have 6 holes. You're still drowning over there in your boat until you get all of it resolved, but we're just beginning the process over here. We haven't talked much about things that will impact us in the future, and one of them was joining the 100 Resilient Cities, which created a resilient plan for the city of Houston. And we're looking at stresses and shocks. A stress can be an underperforming school system. Schools are bad in Houston, so people move to the suburbs to get to better schools. Aging infrastructure makes bad roads. Bad roads mean people don't want to move here because there's potholes everywhere. Of course, flooding is one of those events, but there are stresses and there are shocks. a shock is something like COVID-19, that it's hard to prepare for COVID-19. It just happens and you deal with it. An earthquake that we hadn't anticipated, would be a shock. So there are stresses and shocks, and you're trying to figure out how to balance both of them to become more resilient. I think we had joined after Harvey, and I think we're seeing some positive outcome from that, but it's a long-term deal. And what it gave us was the ability to share stories and experiences with 100 cities across the world, from Mumbai to Johannesburg to Sydney, Australia. All have similar situations, especially coastal cities around the world, the Amsterdams, areas in the Netherlands and Denmark that were on the coast that were having rising sea waters, and how we're going to deal with these sort of things. So that's resiliency. And then we adopted a climate action plan we've been working on for a fair amount of time, and it will set in place goals, rules, and regulations that we must accomplish over the next time period. Some of them are 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years. But even energy codes as they relate to housing will be impacted by the adoption of this climate action plan. So that was adopted, and we're going to talk about that a little more in depth here. And then we're seeing, of course, fairly strong home sales now, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, but I'm not going to delve too much into housing statistics. I'm just going to talk about the future and the impact of Harvey and rules that have happened after Harvey. We had the National Flood Insurance Program that was set to be modified in 2020. I had always mentioned, because I thought it was an election year, that it was going to be delayed, and it didn't take long to figure out that they did do exactly what I had anticipated, move this so that it's not so political in a national election period. And so the program for replacing flood insurance moved 1 year. It's set today to the rules and the announcement in April of 2021 to go into effect of October 2021. And it's a pretty dramatic change to the whole flood insurance program that has never been revamped since the 60s and 70s. And literally everything you know about the flood insurance program will be thrown away, and you will start over if you were designing the flood insurance from the beginning at 2020. It's going to be pretty, and it's called Risk Point 2. I'm going to talk about that a little more in depth. And at the same time you have the flood insurance program being replaced, you have new maps with new data and new technology and new information that you've never used before in mapping. Before, we tended to just pour some water and see what the rising of that water is. And that's one way to map. But I'm going to show you that is almost insignificant in how we're going to utilize the new maps. And Harris County is fortunate to be on the forefront of new mapping strategies for resiliency when it comes to the flood maps. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. And it's important, here are the flooded structures and the basic floodways. And this was from Harvey again. You can kind of see this equitable distribution of flooding throughout the area. It wasn't just in one, I'm not sure what happened there, not just one area, but much of the city and much of the county did flood. And so immediately the city began deciding that what we have to do is to protect the housing stock of the citizens of Houston. In many ways, if you just look at it, we have hundreds of thousands of houses that were built that weren't even in the city of Houston, that we never had a flood program, we never had a flood map, and they're built. And in reality, they are too low for the topography and the situation that we have in Houston, Texas. The structures are at risk. I mean, we have 36,000 structures that have flooded repeatedly over the last decades. And it doesn't make much economic sense to give someone $250,000, they remodel the house, 2 years later it floods, you give them $250,000, they remodel, it floods 2 years later, you give them $250,000. I mean, it just seems to be a certain amount of insanity when it came to keep doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result. So the goal of the city by policy was to get houses out of harm's way, and to not only get them out of harm's way today, but to plan for the future, for higher intensity of rainfall and more concrete and more people. And so the housing stock's designed to last, 30 to 50 years. So prepare for 30 to 50 years from now. And it is painful and it is costly. I I don't want to be insensitive by any means. We have raised the cost of housing. We have certainly made it less affordable for many of our people, especially those with lower cost housing. I mean, it's disproportionate to people in the $100,000 to $200,000 to $300,000 range when you add $30,000 to the cost, as opposed to $1 million house or a $2 million house. So it is something that we're going to have to continue to address. But the way this scenario worked before July of 2018, we used to build at the 100-year floodplain, and we added 1 foot to that. Okay? And with that, we saw the hundreds of thousands of houses that were flooding. Now you build to the higher standard of 500-year plus 2 feet. The difference in this scenario across the city is about 3.5 feet. And that's pretty significant. The difference of City Hall, which is in the 100-year floodplain, is 6.5 feet, just for comparison's sake here. And I'm going to show you how to measure the difference between these two. And we're doing this only in the 100-year and the 500-year floodplain. So this equates to today about 37% of all tracts of land in the county, okay, are in the 100 and 500-year floodplain. But we mentioned 90,000 structures, or 65% of the structures that flooded, were not even in the floodplain. So we have to do something to protect those houses also. But this is a pretty significant increase. And of course, these are grandfathered that are here before, but often when we're preparing for the new flood insurance program and the new maps, because today, if you built this house and you think you're 1 foot above the base flood elevation, and very soon you're 3 feet below the base flood elevation, or you're now in a floodplain and you weren't in the floodplain before and you require insurance, and instead of insurance being $500, it's $4,000, don't we need to let the world know about this? And we clearly identified about 400,000 structures that are not in the floodplain today that are going to be in the floodplain very soon. 400,000 homes are going to be added to the floodplain at the time when the flood insurance program is going to be totally rewritten, and it's going to be more expensive. There's no way that it's going to be, it could be less expensive for some people. The type of person, the type of property owner would be less expensive is if you were in the 100-year floodplain and you haven't had a claim in the last 10 years and you're significantly high, your rate may go down because your risk is lower. Follow the math for just a second. 90,000 structures flooded in Harvey that were not in the floodplain that paid the least amount of money for insurance. So the most claims were outside the floodplain. They received the most amount of money, billions of dollars, and they paid the least. And the people who paid the most received the least amount of money. That doesn't make any sense at all. The risk should be, and the payment should be based on the risk associated with it. So keep in mind, these 90,000 structures that flooded that only paid, less than $500 for their flood insurance, but got $250,000, it's not going to be that way anymore. It's going to change. And so the dollar amounts are going to change. Now, I'm not an insurance agent and things change all the time, but I mean, I'm just following the math, and it wouldn't take rocket science to figure out that's not what they're doing anymore. And you can Google any of these sort of things and you'll see the headlines about what the leaders are saying about it. They haven't released all of this information 100%. You can Google risk point 2 on flood maps and you can get a taste of what it's going to be like. But they make it clear it's going to be painful for a fair number of people. And the city wants to get ahead of this. They're trying to make sure that at least from this point forward, and there was just a defining moment. The defining moment is, July of 2018 when these rules went into play. And in some ways you just have to say, we can't keep committing the sins of the past. They are what they are, and we're going to just do better from this point forward. And that's really what happened. And the county actually adopted standards higher than the city before the city did. So, there's certainly, and there's some other changes here These changes, you know, I go into thorough detail in my flooding class, but I'm not going to delve into it now. I'll answer questions later about it. But pretty significant changes in the 100-year and 500-year floodplain, both in the city and in the county, which impact us all, especially for new constructions or additions. And then, of course, we have to do something about the structures that are not in the floodplain today. And we're still working our way through this. Right now, we have this certain that says you're going to build a certain amount of height above the crown of the street. The typical deal is about 12 inches across the city and the county, and we're raising that. So outside of the floodplain, you're seeing higher standards for developers. Now, an individual property owner today, even in the county, very hard to even build a slab house. Most houses are going to be pier and beam, you know, because you're not allowed to have fill add a bunch of dirt to your particular property. Now it works in large developments because they create detention ponds. They pull out dirt, create a lake. They use that dirt to raise their property. They get their houses out of the floodplain. So large scale development can manipulate their dirt. Small individual lots, you know, 10,000, 5,000 square foot lots don't have the same ability to do that sort of thing. So, I mean, in many ways, the city and the county are trying to encourage every one of us to build these pier and beam foundations because, let's be clear, we want to store the water under your house, okay? We have nowhere else to put it. We can't put it into the Gulf of Mexico quick enough. We can't design a street grid system large enough in order to hold the water in the storm sewer underneath the street. So you have to prepare for the street to flood, and you have to prepare for the water to rise, and it's got to be held somewhere. And in many ways, yes, we're holding it underneath your house. And the way to hold it underneath your house is with this pier and beam construction. And of course, we're doing other things to get things out of harm's way, which is requiring air conditioners and things that normally would have flooded to be raised up to keep, you know, who wants to flood, your house is up 5 feet, but you have to replace 2 air conditioning units, you know, every other year because of flooding water. So we're constantly changing these sort of rules, and they're incremental, and you don't really know that much about them until you have to do something. And your AC is on the ground today, and you get a permit and you replace your AC, and now you've got to put it someplace else. We're going to talk how the climate action plan may also impact much of this. So certain changes on impervious cover, certain changes on detention, always being tweaked over here. So they're constantly, you know, I tell people I do not allow in my firm for us to say room for a pool, because I'm nervous as hell that we sell a house and they think they can put a swimming pool, but because too much of the pool would take up the impervious cover, the city won't allow a swimming pool, because you have to have a certain amount of green space that rainfall can drop and go directly into the ground. And the amount of sidewalks, the amount of driveways, the coverage of the house, a garage, a shed, a deck, anything that impacts that impacts your ability to be able to use the rest of the space. And you're constantly increasing this to make more ability for rainfall to fall and go into the ground. I mean, that's, of course you could imagine that you're doing that. So changes happening in all of these sort of things all of the time. Important to remember, our old flood maps are assuming that we basically get 12 inches of rain per 24 hours. And with the new map, one of the calculations is going to be more accurate rainfall, which tends to be 17 to 18 inches of rain, not 12. So just, it doesn't take too much to figure out it's just one aspect. You're going to measure using 18 inches of rain versus 12 inches of rain and see what happens to water. That's one way that you're going to recalculate the maps. And of course, we've been able to see the large number of structures that flood outside of the floodplain to see why we need to go and make some of these changes. So if we're not, I'm not as always good about this. So Maya, I got to switch to my next deal. How do I get that to my website? I go, okay. I want to share with you, if you're not on a regular basis, coming to this website, Harris County Flood Control District, around the region, this is a great resource to see what's happening in a particular area. So this is this $2.5 billion leveraged by other money, state and federal typically, to see what we're doing in a particular area. And we're doing things for resiliency, we're doing things for recovery, and we're doing things to prepare for the future. So you should really get a hold of knowing what's happening in a particular area. And this is telling you what we've done since Harvey. I mean, they're telling you we've only really had 503 buyouts. These buyouts are just not that easy. They're voluntary to begin with. The city has no money, so that means the buyouts are typically only in the county. You know, it's just hard to buy out when people don't want to be bought out. They hold out as long as possible to get as much money as they can. So, I mean, it's not like we're buying out tens of thousands of these 400,000 houses we know that are at risk. We bought 503 of them or whatever. And you can get all kinds of information on this website. And we're going to talk about a couple of these. What's important to see is where we are over here in that particular area. So this, you can just go to this map quickly and it shows you, okay, here's where we're doing some projects and what are we doing in these sort of projects. So you can click on one of these little deals. That one's not a good one, although I like that one. So here's a typical project. This is a project designed to increase detention along north of I-45 and 610 here. It's a pretty good project. We had identified I say we collectively, this is just kind of the region, the city, the county, everyone kind of works together. Here's where we are on this project. We're requiring more right-of-way along White Oak Bayou. This is showing you the large amount of area that this is impacting. You can see along White Oak Bayou from about 290 almost all the way to 45 as it gets close to downtown. We spent $8 million on acquisition of some additional right-of-way. We spent $1.5 million on a feasibility study, and now we're working on that project. We've only spent $114,000 of the $1.1 million of the actual project. You had to acquire the right-of-way first. You had to do the feasibility study, and now we're in the middle of this project. But it should significantly help. What is this water flowing along White Oak Bayou as it gets down into Timber Grove, as it gets to Shady Acres, as it's coming into downtown, impacting all the area along Buffalo Bayou and these areas right here. This water, remember, all of this water is headed all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. It's going to get here some way, in a bayou, in a pipe, or on a street. So this is just an example of one little project that is going on. And you can see back at this map, the projects are spread out throughout the entire county. And you can go and see what's happening in a particular area at any given moment with regards to some of these projects. This is your $2.5 billion being leveraged. Part of the problem is the sheer capacity of it. You got to realize in 2018, Harris County Flood Control District spent about $100 million on flooding and flood control. Now you've got this $10 billion, $5 to $10 billion you're trying to spend. You don't have the capacity. You have no ability. There's not enough engineers. There's not enough workers. If you flood the market with that much work, the cost of the project escalates or whatever. I tell people, if you're used to 10 listings and all of a sudden I gave you 1,000 listings, how well are you going to do with your 1,000 listings? You can't accommodate 1,000 listings. And so the Flood Control District is now spending $400 to $500 million a year, which is a 400 or 500% increase as they try to ramp up to do these projects. But they're just not able to do these projects as quickly as you might think. So the average lifespan is 7 to 10 years for much of these deals. They had initially said 10 to 15. I think they found a way to speed up fairly significant all of these projects. But I mean, there is at some point just a capacity of what's going on there. And so you can look, not only do we spend money on these projects that are major, but we have just basic maintenance projects that are going on all the time. Every time, this is just a typical erosion in the bayou. So you're having to go over there. You can load a photo right here, and I can generally go and see this erosion. When there's debris from a storm, it comes into this project, and it tells us the maintenance projects that we're doing at any particular moment throughout the entire county. So it's a pretty good way to see if you're selling a particular house in a region, you might want to go and see what are we doing to impact the flooding. And clearly the goal is to stop flooding. I mean, it's to houses that have flooded, subdivisions that have flooded, what can we do in order to go over there and eliminate the flooding? Because A, it's not good tax policy to have flooded houses. That reduces the taxable value. And of course, that's less money the city and county make. So they clearly want to do projects to help houses from flooding and, you know, doing these projects in order to do so. So this mapping system is really an excellent way for you to go and see what's happening at any particular moment. And I do think, I mean, there's community meetings, it's telling you all about what's happening at any particular moment. I love this. We were talking earlier, you can sign up and you can get a little alert at any particular moment to see what's happening. Let me see how where my little map thing is here now. So you can see we're into these alert systems a lot. So we're trying to warn people better than ever about what's going on. It's really not loading as fast as I would like for it to. But we have this alert system that shows us where the water is at any given moment, and we're alerting people. And you can sign up for these alerts and see how it's working. Let's see, let's get out of there one moment. Go back and see if I can get there, if it will load. But you can see flooding throughout the city on this particular map at any given moment. So we know what the rainfall is, and if you sign up for this alert system and you live in this region and you want to know if North Main at I-45 is flooded, it'll just text you that information. It'll text it to you or email it to you very readily. And we have spent hundreds of millions of dollars to warn people of potential flooding in their particular area. So just one more thing to talk about. So Harris County Flood Control District, very easy website to navigate. They update it very regularly. It's a great resource for you to go to. This is a fascinating portion of this website. This is called Map Next. This is where we're starting to formulate the rules and methodologies for creating these new maps. Sorry, I hit the wrong button there. So it's showing, instead of just pouring 18 inches of water into geography and seeing how the water rises, which is one way to do a map, we're not doing that anymore. With the new maps, you're using a whole new set of criteria. So you're using previous flood claims, you're using the grid system of the street, you're taking in the topography of the storm sewer, you're looking at different types of methodology of how you're actually doing this. So they've got little maps here. Let me see if I can get here to show you that they're flying airplanes over the area, and they're taking, let me see if I can show you this. They're using more data than everyone. So they're trying to remind you, we all live in a flood zone. It's just what flood zone do we live in? And so they're using new technology in order to create these new maps. And it really is great technology that they're using hydrology and using new data to calculate these new maps. Let me see if I can show you how the little airplane thing works. But this Map Next is how we're going to calculate the new map. So they're, like I said, they're flying these airplanes. This is taking into account how much concrete, how big is the building, what is the curb like, what is the ditch like, what is the surrounding area like, and they're using this new radar data to recalculate how we're using this. It's the flow of water. Your flood risk is determined by what's happening outside of just your piece of land. It's impacted by the modeling of how the water is going to flow over particular areas. So we're using new modeling techniques to come up with these new maps, which I think is going to be a great way to get more accurate maps, which is the goal. The problem is that this is a very time-consuming, long process that we would like to be done with, and we're just not going to be done with. So they're showing you where we're at in this project. So the problem is you're getting new flood insurance using old, outdated maps, and then you're going to get new maps, which is going to change everything once again. So the maps will probably be released sometime in 2022. They're on schedule for this sort of deal. When they release the preliminary maps, there's a comment period, 6 to 9 months, and then there's a period before they're adopted. So these new maps probably are not adopted until 2023. So the building codes are going to change then. The rules and regulations for the city and the county will all change one more time. But in the interim, you've got a flood insurance program that's changing in 2021. So it gets a little confusing. So you're going to have a lot of pain for people that are going to be in a flood zone at a time when the flood insurance program is escalating. And then you're going to add significantly more homes to it when you get these new maps. So you have to pay attention to both of these projects and how they're going to impact your housing. Clearly, the higher the house is, the less risky it is, right? I mean, so oftentimes, we've been trying to promote, get an elevation certificate for almost every house in Houston. We're only getting these elevation certificates in the 100-year floodplain. And then it's important to not pay attention to the 100-year base flood elevation, because that number's soon going to be irrelevant, but to pay attention to the 500-year base flood elevation, which is a more accurate indication of where you're going to land with the new maps, with the new insurance program. You can get a base flood elevation on every piece of property in the world. Kansas City has a base flood elevation rising from sea level, okay? You can get it in Oklahoma City. So don't let someone tell you you just need a base flood elevation in the 100-year flood zone. You don't. You need an elevation certificate. If you're at I think you need flood insurance if you're in Harris County. I think everyone needs flood insurance, okay? If we all got flood insurance, it would be cheaper for all of us. Then to get an accurate cost of the flood insurance, you're going to need to know this base flood elevation, and you need to know the 500-year base flood elevation, which is very confusing to people. But we're going to try and emphasize this more and more again. So Atlas 14 tied to the new technology and the new hydrology to recalculate new maps that will come in line. So here we are in hurricane season of 2020. Hurricane season lasts a lot longer than you've seen. So here it's from June to November. We already had seen hurricanes before hurricane season, changing topography, changing situation throughout the climates of especially the Gulf Coast is impacting these hurricanes and these water events. I don't worry quite so much about hurricane as I do just water coming in off the coast, dropping 10 inches on Clinton Avenue and seeing what happens to flooding when that happens. It doesn't have to happen just in a hurricane by any means. And the typical hurricane event had really been a wind event, not a flooding event from rising water. But we're in hurricane season, and we need to be aware of what's happening. There are so many of these websites coming out that are trying to assume your flood risk. We're seeing them on HAR and the MLS, you're seeing them at realtor.com, you're seeing them at Zillow, and I've just put a few in here to give you some reference so you can go and look at. Yes, what's the question?
Are these new only for Harris County, or is it done by insurance companies everywhere?
It's a national program for the maps, and they do it by region, and they will do Montgomery County when they do Harris County. It's certainly not just Harris County. Galveston County was a little ahead of us, and so they're really not on the exact same time. They're going to have to update their maps to some degree, but yes, Fort Bend, Montgomery County, Harris County, all of these areas are going to get new maps at basically the same time. The point of this slide is to show you if I put in an address and I went to myfloodrisk.org and put it in, and I went to flood factor and put it in, and I went to climate score and I put it in, I would get 3 different answers. And I'm here to tell you, I don't believe any of them are that accurate, okay? I wouldn't rely on these things at all because they're using old, outdated information or even historic data. And I was going to show you one. So here you can go to my flood risk here. This is my assistant's house, 4405 Viking. You can put in basically any address. They've got this information more so than you ever thought before. It pulls it up, it calculates. So he lives by the bayou in White Oak, did not flood during Harvey, but is in the 100-year floodplain. It will actually even pull up his house. I think I have this worked out. Okay, well, it will even show a picture of the house and it will prepare a risk analysis. So his risk analysis on that Viking house was 23 there. I'm telling you that really isn't that accurate for that particular house. If I went and did the same risk analysis on one of these other sites, flood factor or climate score, I would get a different risk factor altogether. I just want you not to rely on this information, and I don't want the consumers, and I'm very nervous the consumers are getting misinformation. We talked about this at an HR board meeting recently. It's making it sound like some houses are at high risk that are not at risk, and it's giving people a false sense of security that they're not at risk when they're greatly at risk. What you really need to go get is where the base flood elevation of that particular house is. I'm building in the 100-year floodplain my personal house, which costs millions of dollars. I'm just going to build resiliently. I'm going to build high enough to withstand rising water. Everyone needs to assume that they're in a very high risk of flooding, and they just need to build appropriately for that. So we're in the game of selling houses. I want to sell houses. And the geography of where it is isn't so important to me as it is the elevation of that particular structure. So I mean that, and like I say, it's a pretty simple deal. If you just don't know, stand in the middle of the street, and if you're looking up, it's really good. And if you're looking down, it's probably pretty risky. That would be your first level of risk analysis that you would need to take over there. If you're looking down, the water will go over that street at some particular junction, and it's going to flow down into whatever's there, a structure or underneath the structure, if it's a pier and beam situation. So, yes.
Please give an example of what will change in 2024 and 2023 based on that.
Perfectly good example, okay? So a website we do like is Walter P. Moore. This is, and you can register, it's free, and we've only really, on Walter P. Moore, we only have the information that we need for the 100-year and the 500-year floodplain. So we haven't mapped, this was a grant that was given, we haven't mapped the entire county, but we've mapped anything in the 100-year or 500-year floodplain. So let's go back to 4405 Viking Drive in Houston, Texas. It pops up 4405 Viking right here, and if I zoom out, I can see, okay, here's the floodway. Floodway, bad. Red means bad. Things that are in the floodway need to get out of the floodway. Decks, garages, fences, obstructions that are in the floodway, we need to make way for the water, and they're in the process of removing impediments to the floodway. Blue here is 100-year floodplain. So just take this map for an example. In the new maps, 2021, probably what's in green, the 100-year floodplain will take in this green area. So 500 becomes 100, 100 goes to 25. It's all still just the 100. And the 500-year probably gets larger around here, right? It's just a basic assumption. But the assumption for today, and the county made this assumption, what is the 500 becomes the 100 with the new map. If you calculate these structures around here, so I take this structure at 4405 deal, and I go and say, okay, Before this structure, the city code was at 60, let's just call this 68 for simplicity, and we could have built at 1 foot above that, so at 69 feet. You would have built 69 feet high under the old code. He's probably built it 60, I have this deal. He is built, his bottom of his first floor is at 69 feet. So for today, in his 100-year floodplain, he meets the old code and the insurance is still low for this house because his risk is lower. But if that house, which is at 69 today, burned down, lightning strikes it, floods, you would not be able to remodel that house or rebuild that house because the new standard, let's say this is almost 70, is 2 feet higher than that. You'd have to be at 72. So today, his base flood elevation is at 69, which means his flood insurance is low. When the new map kicks in and he's 2 feet below the base flood elevation at a time when the insurance rates escalate, instead of paying $500 for insurance, most likely will pay $4,000 or $5,000 for insurance, right? So he's going to be, with the new maps, 2 feet below the base flood elevation at a time when the insurance program may not grandfather anymore and the rates got higher. And this condition exists for hundreds of thousands of houses in Harris County. Okay, it's not just this house. Hundreds of thousands of houses are going to be significant. We have brand new houses being built today that were permitted prior to July 1 of 2018 that have low insurance today and are 1 foot above the base flood elevation. They're not going to be 1 foot above the base flood elevation. If you go into the chat and you put in some address, we can pull up a couple more of these addresses. But this is a prime example of what we're talking about. Houses that we think are 1 foot above the base flood elevation. And you go to, I can probably go here on, well, I can go to Climate Score, I think. And it's using the same deal. It's assuming that you're above the base flood elevation and you're just not. Let's see if I can get out of here one more time. It doesn't like that. I'll go someplace else. But yeah, you're assuming you're 2 feet above or 1 foot above or slightly above the base flood elevation, and you're just not above the base flood elevation. You're below the base flood elevation. Mario, any other question on that? You can put in any number of addresses right here. You can register for this site. You register at walterpmoore.com, and the website is flood.walterpmoore, and you can put in any house and it pulls up, and we've measured the difference between the 500 and the 100-year base flood elevation. This doesn't tell me where the house is. I don't, this website isn't telling me, and so this house could be at 75 feet or it could be at 55 feet. You need the elevation certificate to tell me that. It will tell me what the base flood elevation is. That's a benchmark. And then everyone needs to compare to the, even if you have flood insurance today and your flood insurance is low, recalculate at the 500-year base flood elevation, because that's going to be your indication of, are you above or below when the new maps kick in? Am I clear about that, how that's working? Okay, so here's just some maps. Here was the update on the bottom. So same thing. If you just Google this deal, same thing. It's telling you risk rating 2.0 is the new insurance program. It's taking into account new things. And it's kind of like, you have to think of this like car insurance. Forget thinking about geography. I'm in the 100-year floodplain and I'm 5 feet up, so that's the basis of my rate. Think of it like car insurance. Women are cheap. I'm the same age as another woman. The woman is cheaper than the man, okay? An 18-year-old is more expensive than a 35-year-old. People who drive in Harris County have higher insurance rates than people who live in Montgomery County. People with 3 tickets pay more for insurance than people with no tickets. There's a lot of factors that determine your your insurance rate. Your Ferrari costs more to insure than does your Honda. So the same thing, the $250,000 probably goes away because the $1 million house needs more insurance, and maybe the $100,000 house doesn't need as much insurance. So there should be different rates and different ways to calculate the rate and different payouts based on a number of different factors. So literally everything you know about the insurance program, throw away, won't make any difference. Build a new system based on information that you have today, and that's really what's going to happen. And like I say, there's plenty of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Newsweek and Time write about this all the time. It isn't going to be pretty for a fair number of people. It's going to be expensive. Go back to full screen. How do I do that, Mario? View full screen. Okay, I'll go there. Present. Okay, so let's keep going. But good news is, so I think in the short term, 2021, 2023, 2024, I think it's going to be very painful. I think we just need to prepare for very painful. Then hopefully the intention is to use the bond money, the federal money, and the state money and get houses out of harm's way. Houses with the new maps, more houses are going to be in the floodplain, okay? If we could mitigate that, you could get houses out of harm's way, which would make the insurance more affordable. You're going to have to demand that we map again. So when we do a project, you got to go back and remap. The problem with, keep in mind, Harris County, 2,500 miles of Harris County has never been mapped before. The state of Texas never paid for a map until we allocated the money out of the last legislative session, which can be used to remap after these projects are done. So many of the things that we're doing at the city and the county level for mitigation are designed to get homes out of harm's way. And we have to do a certain number of things. So we're looking at where's the biggest bang for the buck? What can we do that will go and help reduce the flood risk, not for an individual, but for subdivisions or sections of the city or county that we can most work on. And look, we've been working on these projects for a very long period of time. I mean, some of these projects we've been talking about for 20 and 30 years. We never had the money to do it and never had the political will to go and do it, and it just wasn't important. We must, all of us, the citizens, must continue to demand that we get across the goal line a number of these projects. So when we look every segment, every parcel of land in the county has been evaluated to see where we can go to hold more water. Every parcel of land, every park, every public building, every private building. And we've gone in and every entity, this is the state, this is the federal government, this is the local government, this is flood control, all going in together. And it does take, it's not one group working on this. It's a fair number of groups where we're looking, how can we help all of these people by working collaboratively in each little area. And I promise you, every segment of the county, we have done this to see where we can get the biggest bang for the buck. Maybe we're going to increase detention here to help these people way down here that live, or these structures down here. So you're not just doing a project for the immediate area, you're doing projects for the whole area as we go there. So we look at major projects, and this is city money that we got as a result of Harvey. Okay, so we're getting this is not the county's money. The county has money, they have a bond program. This is the city using money that we got, from the federal government. Don't want to slam the federal government. I just want to talk about two small statements about how insane sometimes the federal government is. Prior to Harvey, prior to this amount of money, if you got money from the federal government, the only thing you could do was put it back the way it was. We had 7 sewage treatment plants flood during Harvey. Thank God we have a lot of sewage treatment plants and we didn't have a water contamination problem, but those projects were doomed. If we took the federal money before, we had to rebuild those 7 sewage treatment plants, which I promise you would have just flooded again at sometime in the near future. We didn't want to rebuild it the way it was. We want to rebuild them in a different location at a higher elevation so that they were not going to be at risk of flooding again. That's why these projects take so long. To rewrite the rules of how to get that money took an act of Congress, and then the money has to go to the federal government, then to the state government, then to the local government to get a number of these projects. So we had to fight like hell not to have insanity just to do it again. Same way with many of the recovery dollars. It doesn't make sense. You have a 4-bedroom home, it floods, you want federal money, you didn't have flood insurance, you want federal money to redo the house, basically rebuild the house. And it was based on the number of people that lived at home. So if it's just a couple at home, the 3 kids are gone, they could not get money to build back a 4-bedroom house. You could only build back a 2-bedroom house. That's the way the federal money worked. Now, it penalized the people who had kids away at school or someone that had a larger house. You couldn't get money to rebuild, and we still are fighting this battle today. It's why a large number of the houses haven't been rebuilt or they don't have that recovery money. We're still in a fight with the federal and the state government because we want to be, if you had 4 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms, we want the ability to build back 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms. The law, as it is written, you can only build back however number of people. So 4-bedroom house, 1 kid's off to college, you have 1 in high school, you're a couple, you're divorced now, it's just you and a kid, 2-bedroom house, no 3-bedroom house, 4-bedroom house. So some of these rules have been very complicated and we've had to fight a fair amount of way in order to bring some sort of common sense. It's a bigger problem than that. I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible. These were projects that the city had been working on way before Harvey, back in Rita, back in Allison, back for a long period of time. Major projects that could have been done, but we never really had the money or allocated money to fix them. And you can see there's fairly good distribution of where these projects are. When Harvey came, we're going to get a certain amount of federal money. We reallocated resources to speed up these projects to demonstrate we'd like to spend money in these projects here. And luckily, we have gotten money for a number of these projects. And the best thing for all of us as taxpayers is they have to spend the money within 3 years, or you have to give it back to the federal government. So we love a deadline over here. So you're likely to get a fair number of these projects done. This is the Inwood Golf Course that the City of Houston acquired. It's up in this area between 290 and 45 over here. We can take this property. We got $48.6 million. We have this money. This money has been wired to us. We have this money, so this project is going forward. And we'll lower this golf course and we'll create a recreation and detention facility, which will help all of this area, including the area going all the way down to downtown Houston. This project is well on its way. Here's 2 minutes. Oh no, we need more than 2 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna speed up. Here's a project in Kingwood, replacing the dams in Kingwood. Here's the North and South Canal. This is a huge project. We're channeling our $163 million with TxDOT, with the county, with the management districts. This project has the potential to get tens, if not hundreds of thousands of houses out of harm's way, as far away as Memorial and Spring Branch. And this project will be new detainage recreation facility on the other side of basically 610 and 59 now. But tied to that, an example is we're redoing the bridges at Heights Boulevard and Yale because they're too low. The rainfall, when it rains as much, hits the bridge, goes back and floods homes in Memorial and other areas. Even the bridges up at TC Jester, in Oak Forest and Timber Grove, those bridges. So we're going to raise those bridges so we can get the water quicker to the North and South Canal, so we can hold it there so it can dissipate and before it goes on to the Gulf of Mexico. Huge project that we have been working on literally 30 years. We've known about the North and South Canal, and now we're working on it, and it will come to fruition. Climate Action Plan is definitely going to impact all of real estate. It has the potential to be very costly for older structures. A typical example of how this is impacting us, every time we increase the energy code, the SEER rating of air conditioners get larger, which makes them more efficient, which is a very good thing, but the size of that air conditioner is larger. So typically we sell a townhouse that was built in the 3-foot build line from 2009. There was 3 feet, we plopped in an air conditioner. New air conditioning rules make that air conditioner 4 feet by 4 feet. 4 feet by 4 feet are not fitting in the 3-foot build line. So when your AC goes out, you can't replace it with the one you've got. You've got to put a bigger one. The bigger one doesn't fit where it is today. You've got to move your AC unit to the back of your house or raise it up into the air like I showed in the pictures earlier. These type of policies that are slowly being implemented, many of them you'll see target dates of 2021 to 2025, trying to speed up what we can, will impact the cost of housing. It will impact the design of housing, certainly impact older housing that have to be retrofitted. The commercial world is very concerned about these rules. The cost to upgrade windows at the Transco Tower or whatever we're calling that one today, I mean, you're talking about maybe $100 million to get into compliance for a structure that large. But these are rules that are coming down to play. So you have to pay attention to the climate action plan and the resilient plan if you haven't before. So sales are good, but we can't forget the flooding events. You need to, and it doesn't matter if the house is never flooded or didn't flood during Harvey. The risk of it still flooding is gauged on other things: the height of the house, the base flood elevation, calculating the 500-year base flood elevation. So I teach this class, Survival to the Floodplain. It's 3 hours. I don't really like Zoom classes, but I'm going to do my best to resume these via Zoom where we can take more time and to delve into each of these areas. I just wanted to spend this time to kind of update you the large number of factors that are coming into play that are going to impact housing, the rebuilding of housing, the construction of new housing, and the cost of the insurance program. So time for a question or two. Have you got any? Any questions, Mario? No questions? Okay. Marilyn, how'd I do here? I can unmute you, I think.
You did awesome.
Good?
You did awesome.
Okay.
As always, you have such a huge amount of information. You're so knowledgeable and deliver it so well.
I'm passionate about this topic. I'm passionate that every real estate agent understands this and know where to find some of these answers. Questions?
Yes.
Go ahead, Mario. What have we got? Through the surveyor. You order the elevation certificate from a surveyor. The cost of an elevation certificate is about $450, especially if you're already getting some form of survey. Easier to get when you're already getting a survey. That's why I think anyone that's buying a house needs to mark the 500-year base flood elevation on that particular survey, because they soon might be in the floodplain, and go ahead and get an elevation certificate so you're going to know your level of risk and the likelihood of what your insurance is going to cost. So to mark the 500-year base flood elevation on a survey costs $0, zero. To get the elevation certificate generally costs between $400 and $500. You know, these historical buildings, I mean, I think they're going to have to be modified to meet some of this new criteria. I think, I mean, we want to try and protect the ones we can. City Hall is a perfect example. It's a historic structure. We're trying our best to get it out of harm's way. Of course, City Hall has flooded a number of times. I mean, we can't continue to let City Hall flood. So we're definitely working on some of these projects and even neighborhoods that have a historic propensity. But there are some neighborhoods that are historic. The housing stock is just too low. I mean, and we'll never be able to design or build our way out of that. Some of those structures are just going to have to be raised. I'm not saying we have to tear them all down, but there is a certain amount of housing stock that isn't going to survive. And maybe just modify the first floor. If you know, I think we have a fair number of townhouses where we have a garage and a tiny little room down there, and you're going to get rid of that tiny little room and you're going to move the front door to the second story, because that's the only way you're going to be able to afford the insurance of some of these structures or whatever. So just remove the living space, add the vents, have an oversized garage on the first floor, and have, you know, you still have that townhouse there, but it's more resilient. It's then safer and the insurance will be cheaper. I go over to some examples in my class of how we can do that. Any other question, Mario? Absolutely. There's plenty of areas in the Heights that are too low. Go to right now what is Gladys and Usner, and you can see they have a little brick bungalow. They just moved it up 4 feet. They're in the process, so you can kind of see how this works very easily. Of course, all those White Oak condominiums, the first floor of all those things should just be torn out altogether, and I think they're totally at risk. But there are plenty of houses, not just the ones close to the bayou. When we had Imelda and when we've had these recent rains, I mean, I'm here at the corner of 10th and Studewood. The rain gets over the curb at 10th and Studewood all the time. Blue Line Bikes, which is at Yale and 13th or 14th or whatever, the water gets inside Blue Line Bikes all the time. It's a historic older structure built in the 50s. It's just too low. The water has nowhere to go. These garages are going to flood. These houses that are built on grade are going to flood. Many of them are going to be in the Heights, and they're going to be in other areas. Certainly the pier and beam structures are significantly better, and it's easier to raise the pier and beam structures, but we're raising that pier and beam structure that I mentioned at Usner and Gladys right now. But many, many, many more of these houses are going to need to be raised along Wendell and Byrne and 6.5 Street, and it's just the function of the houses are too low in comparison to the street. Look at the street grid. Any other questions? Okay, I want to thank you all very much. We will email you this presentation. Yes, I think we have everyone's email to email them the presentation.
Yes, it'll be
Yes.
in the Zoom meeting. We can get that. And the
Perfect.
recording, since we recorded the session, we'll provide a link to that recording as well.
Excellent. Okay.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you so much. I
Really
appreciate it very
appreciate your
much.
time. Thank you all for attending. And we'll go ahead and end the webinar if you would on your end. We'll wrap
Okay.
it up.